The Judiciary Committee will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to welcome all of the members and others to today's markup. And before I turn to the committee's business, I'd like to officially congratulate, now that it is official, the new ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler. We are looking forward to a good, productive year of work together, and I appreciate the work that he did in his temporary and now permanent capacity at the end of last year. I also want to welcome our newest member of the committee, Representative Demings from Florida. Prior to her election to Congress, Ms. Demings served as Orlando's first female chief of police. And I am without a doubt that that law enforcement experience is going to prove to be very valuable in her work on the committee, and we look forward to working with you. So welcome to the committee. I also want to, and I know Mr. Nadler will have more to say about this, but I also want to offer my condolences to Mr. Raskin for the loss of his father. And that's something that happened to me about 30 years ago, and I still miss him. So I understand that very much. Now it's my pleasure to yield to the ranking member.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say I'm humbled and honored to be taking on this role as ranking member. The work we do on the Judiciary Committee is essential in protecting the rule of law, shielding American civil rights and civil liberties from encroachment, strengthening our safety and security, promoting civil and criminal justice, supporting consumer protection, guaranteeing that all people, no matter their age, race, gender, religion, ability, finances, nationality, or sexual orientation, are treated fairly and equally, and serving as a check on executive power. I appreciate the trust my colleagues have put in me to advance these causes as the ranking member. The Judiciary Committee is at the center of some of the most contentious issues facing our country, and we have a reputation for engaging in spirited debate on this committee, to say the least. We also have a strong tradition, however, of bipartisan cooperation and respect, and I intend to do my part to ensure that this continues going forward. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, on the many important issues within our jurisdiction and with all of our colleagues on this committee. I also want to join with you, Mr. Chairman, in welcoming Congresswoman Demings to the committee. Ms. Demings represents Florida's 10th Congressional District, located in Central Florida. As the chairman noted, Ms. Demings will bring invaluable real-world experience to our committee, particularly as a member of the Crime Subcommittee. Notably, she served on the Orlando Police Department for 27 years, and as the chief of police, she saw the Orlando crime rate reduced by 40%, and she's going to tell us all how we can do that in the country. Ms. Demings, I look forward to working with you and welcome you to the committee. And I also want to take a moment to offer my heartfelt condolences to our colleague, Representative Jamie Raskin. Representative Raskin's father, Marcus Raskin, passed away last month. And I must say that I knew of Mr. Raskin's father well before I knew of Mr. Raskin. As a co-founder of the Institute for Policy Studies, Marcus Raskin pioneered important research regarding economic inequality, civil rights, and national security. He also played an influential role in facilitating the New York Times publication of the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War era. Mr. Marcus Raskin was a committed civil rights advocate, respected academic, and prolific author. On behalf of the committee, I would like to extend my condolences to Representative Raskin, to his niece Maggie, who worked on the committee for many years, and to his entire family. It's an honor to serve with Jamie Raskin, and I look forward to continuing to work with him on the committee. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 506 for purposes of markup and move that the committee report the bill favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 506, to amend Title 18 United States Code to provide an additional tool to prevent certain frauds against veterans and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any time, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. H.R. 506, the Preventing Crimes Against Veterans Act of 2017, was introduced by Congressman Tom Rooney, a former member of this committee, and Congressman Ted Deutsch, a current member of this committee. This legislation closes a small but significant loophole in federal law and provides federal prosecutors with an additional tool to pursue criminals who seek to defraud veterans. In recent years, fraudsters have increasingly targeted veterans particularly elderly veterans, and often those in low-income housing, in order to defraud those veterans out of their Veterans Affairs benefits. These criminals offer to help veterans with their cases, claim to get their benefits approved in record time, charge exorbitant fees, and then provide the victims with little or no assistance. Under current law, many of these financial predators would be vulnerable to prosecution under the mail or wire fraud statutes if they engage in this sort of fraudulent scheme by calling a veteran on the phone, sending them an email, mailing them a letter, or otherwise using the instrumentalities of interstate commerce to commit fraud. However, increasingly, these criminals are taking advantage of a loophole in federal law by conducting in-person seminars or meeting in person at a veteran's home or assisted living facility. In at least one recent example, a fraudster entered an assisted living facility in Florida and asked the staff to round up all the veterans for a seminar. This sort of conduct, swindling an elderly veteran out of his or her benefits and doing so face-to-face, is truly reprehensible and worthy of Congress's attention. H.R. 506, which has the support of the veterans service community, addresses this conduct by ensuring that federal law applies in situations where a fraudster may not yet have violated the federal wire or mail fraud statutes. It does this by creating a new statutory crime in the federal criminal code to plug that loophole. It will apply in any situation where a fraudster seeks to defraud a veteran or a dependent or survivor out of their federal veterans' benefits, regardless of whether the criminal has violated the mail or wire fraud statutes. Our nation's veterans have done their duty to protect us from harm. Now, when they are vulnerable, it is our duty to protect them. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation. It's now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler of New York, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to support H.R. 506, the Preventing Crimes Against Veterans Act. This bill provides an important additional tool for federal prosecutors to use against those who engage in fraudulent activities targeting veterans. This bipartisan measure would make it a crime to knowingly engage in any scheme to defraud a veteran of his or her veterans' benefits, or to knowingly engage in fraud in connection with obtaining veterans' benefits for that individual. Anyone convicted of such a crime could be fined, imprisoned up to 5 years, or be subject to both penalties. Because we honor our veterans' service and their sacrifices for us, it is particularly important that we protect them from fraud and that we ensure the integrity of the system of benefits that we provide for them. Currently, there are approximately 21 million veterans of the United States military, men and women who selflessly served our nation and fought in theaters of war from the Second World War to Korea and Vietnam to more recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Unfortunately, many of our veterans, as a result of their service, have physical and mental scars. There are well over 1 million American veterans with service-connected disabilities. The suicide rate among veterans is 300% above the national average, and it is estimated that about 30% of all Vietnam veterans and 20% of veterans of the recent Middle East conflicts suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder in any given year. In addition, veterans are more likely than non-veterans to become homeless. They comprise 17% of our homeless population, and on any given night, there are about 50,000 veterans sleeping on America's streets. Given the dedicated service of our veterans and the hardships many of them continue to face after their military service is completed, it is imperative that we do our utmost to ensure they are appropriately compensated. To that end, the federal government provides a range of financial benefits to veterans, including disability payments to those with service-connected disabilities, pensions for veterans with limited incomes, education and training under the GI Bill, certain benefits for the families of veterans, and various life insurance policies, life insurance benefits. This is the least we can do, and it is still not enough. There continue to be concerns with the quality and availability of the medical care we provide to veterans. And some veterans experience significant delays in the processing and payment of certain benefits because of claims lost by the VA and other paperwork errors. Although these issues are beyond the reach of the Judiciary Committee, we can take action today to protect existing benefits by combating efforts to defraud veterans of their benefits. Absolutely no veteran should be defrauded of his or her well-earned benefits, particularly those in need. Those who defraud veterans and their families of their benefits not only harm these victims, but they also diminish resources required to pay the claims and fund the programs needed to assist those who have served our nation. This bill will help address this problem. Finally, I thank the gentleman from Florida, Representative Ted Deutsch, who is the lead Democratic co-sponsor for his leadership on this important measure. I support this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it likewise. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. It's now my pleasure to recognize the chairman of the Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigation Subcommittee, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Financial fraud is on the rise, and our nation's veterans are often attractive targets. According to a recent survey, 16% of U.S. veterans have lost money to fraudsters, compared to 8% of non-veterans. Veterans also report they are targeted by a large number of scams directly related to their military service or to the veterans' benefits they receive. A staggering 80% of the veterans surveyed said they have encountered veteran-specific scams. H.R. 506, the Preventing Crimes Against Veterans Act, will deter and penalize fraudsters that blatantly engage in a scheme to defraud a veteran or his or her survivor or spouse of their benefits by imposing a fine, imprisonment of up to 5 years, or both. The measure comes after a large number of financial predators have been advertising themselves to the veterans community, claiming that they can speed up the claims process with the VA, often for an outrageous fee. While it is illegal under existing law for anyone who is not an approved agent to charge a fee for helping a veteran with a claim or an appeal with the VA, there are no criminal or financial penalties associated with breaking the law. This bill gives the law some teeth. Defrauding veterans by going after their benefits with false claims is a despicable act. By acting today, we can send a clear message that Congress is determined to hold the perpetrators of these harmful schemes accountable. That's the right thing to do, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes the ranking member of the Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigation Subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for convening us for, I think, an important first step dealing with crime in the second year of the 115th Congress, and of course 2018. Allow me to add my appreciation to the service of our ranking member and to thank Mr. Nadler for all the years of service that he's given to the Judiciary Committee and now his service as a ranking member. Appreciate his astuteness and commitment to the rule of law and look forward to working with him. So I congratulate him for now his enhanced service to the nation. I also want to welcome Chief Demings, of which she now has added a hat. I will never remove the hat of Chief because it was a distinguished position from the perspective of her being the first female and then joining what has typically been an all-male arena and having such leadership on the issue of law enforcement and as well the diminishing of crime in her community. I think she'll be an outstanding asset, and I add my appreciation and congratulations to you for your service. We have come to respect and admire our Vice Chair, Mr. Raskin, and we know of the history of his lineage. I want to offer my sympathy and respect for the passing of his father, but I also believe that we should be reminded of our history, and his father certainly has been one of the pillars of the rule of law and, of course, civil and social justice. So thank you so much for your family and my sympathy to you at this time. I rise to support this bill. This bill as a way to provide an important additional tool for federal prosecutors to use to combat veterans benefits fraud. I'm delighted that my colleague, Mr. Deutsch, has joined Mr. Rooney on this important bill. Because we honor the service of our brave men and women and because of their sacrifices made on our behalf, it's particularly important that we protect our veterans from fraud, abuse, and to ensure that the integrity of the system of benefits is safeguarded. Every time I engage with veterans, I thank them for the willingness to have put on a uniform unselfishly without question. There are approximately 21 million veterans of the United States military living all across our country, and they represent every color and creed and religion. These brave men and women have served our country in theaters of war from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Additionally, they have given their lives and endure physical, emotional, and mental scars. We're all well aware of the continuing veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, and all others, as I've indicated, those that are not necessarily called out, but we know that our soldiers have gone to conflicts, again, unselfishly, all for the sake of our freedom, and as exhibited in these continuous conflicts and wars, they stand to serve. They continue to answer the call to serve this great country and to put the security of our nation above their own safety. Over 1 million veterans, American veterans, now live with service-connected disabilities, 1.1 million veterans under the age of 55. Sadly, the suicide rate among veterans is 300% above the national average. About 30% of all Vietnam veterans have had post-traumatic stress disorder, and up to 20% of veterans serving in more recent conflicts in the Middle East suffer PTSD in a given year. Regrettably, veterans are more likely than non-veterans to become homeless, and statistics show that they make up 17% of our homeless population. It is estimated that 50,000 veterans are sleeping on America's streets on any given night. I know this for a fact in my own home community, that this particular abuse is potentially rampant for individuals going up to homeless veterans on the streets and securing their information and taking their benefits. Given the obvious and extreme sacrifices made by our veterans and the hardships many continue to face after their return, it is imperative that we respond by providing appropriate measures that could adequately compensate our veterans, particularly those in dire need. Currently, we must continue the benefits that they need, and particularly those dealing with PTSD and suicide prevention. Given the longstanding issues with our VA health system and reports about benefits, it is important that we provide this law, the underlying law, to ensure the protection that is needed. That is what H.R. 506 would do. It ensures that prosecutors may bring criminal charges against those who knowingly defraud a veteran of their benefits or in connection with obtaining veterans' benefits, not necessarily by phone, by wire, but it also covers the on-the-street encounter where the benefits information or the information of the veterans is taken and their benefits can be fraudulently taken. The penalty under this title will be imprisonment for not more than 5 years, a fine, or both. This is, of course, not a mandatory minimum. Those who defraud veterans and the systems of veterans' benefits should be punished, as this crime flies in the face of humanity, and it is of utmost need, and it is a basis of our appreciation and gratitude. I further support this bill because criminal prohibitions extend not only to frauds against veterans, but also in instances in which the dependents or survivors of veterans are defrauded out of benefits due to them, and certainly we know that those individuals can be taken advantage of. Again, I thank Mr. Deutsch and Mr. Rooney for leading on this bill. I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 506, the Preventing Crimes Against Veterans Act of 2017, and I yield back my time.
Chair, thanks, gentlewoman. I now recognize myself for the purpose of offering an amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 506 offered by Mr. Goodlatte of Virginia. Page 1, line 8.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and I will recognize myself to explain the amendment. This amendment makes technical changes to the underlying legislation to address issues raised by the Justice Department. First, the amendment replaces the phrase "engages in a scheme of artifice to defraud" with the phrase "executes or attempts to execute a scheme or artifice to defraud." This latter phrase, "executes," is more commonly understood by the courts and is well defined in case law, while the term "engage" is more vague and could lead to unnecessary litigation. The term "executes" is also the term that is currently used in existing fraud offenses. This is a clarifying change that will ensure consistent application of this statute. Second, the amendment promotes consistency in Title 18 by placing the criminal statute in Chapter 63, mail fraud and other fraud offenses, rather than in Title 47, which is home to false statement crimes. Again, this is a technical change that will ensure the code is appropriately placed, the statute is appropriately placed in the criminal code with other offenses criminalizing fraud. I thank the Justice Department for their technical assistance with this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment. I recognize the gentleman from New York for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support your amendment, which makes minor changes to the bill to place the new offense in the appropriate chapter of the Federal Criminal Code and to use the term executes instead of engages in with respect to the conduct of the fraudulent schemes prohibited by the bill. This change will use terminology that is more commonly defined in case law. In addition, the amendment will prohibit attempts to execute these fraudulent schemes in the same manner the bill prohibits such crimes that have been carried through to completion. I support these brief but helpful adjustments to the bill, and I support this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Question occurs on the amendment offered by the chair. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there other amendments? What purpose the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte and Ranking Member Nadler, for your commitment to our veterans, and thank you for bringing this legislation before the committee today. I'd briefly like to recognize my Florida colleague and veteran Tom Rooney, first for his service to this country, but also to thank him for his ongoing commitment to his fellow veterans through the Preventing Crimes Against Veterans Act that we introduced together. The legislation before us today was born out of the recognition that current law simply has not kept pace with the growing sophistication of scam artists and fraudsters seeking to take advantage of America's veterans. I'd also like to thank Greg Dover of Palm Beach County Veterans Services, who has highlighted this ongoing abuse of our veterans by scam artists and has helped make the case for this legislation. I've heard too many stories from my own constituents, veterans, survivors, and families who have been taken advantage of through so-called pension poaching schemes, these scams that target the supplemental aid and attendance pension benefit. In one case, a veteran responded to a solicitation with the hope of securing additional pension benefits. He was met with high-pressure sales tactics in his own home. The sales representative tried to convince him to apply for benefits that he did not want and that he was not eligible for. In addition to filing an improper claim on the veteran's behalf, the scammer lied, told the veteran that he was required to enter into a long-term home health care contract to receive the benefits. Pension poachers combed through South Florida's senior communities to find targets. In one case, after a high-pressure briefing at a senior community, a scammer filed inaccurate claims on behalf of a veteran that intentionally withheld spousal income in order to unlock additional benefits. The veteran paid excessive filing fees of over $600, but that wasn't the worst of it. The VA eventually learned about the additional unreported income. They learned that the veteran was not eligible and sought to claw back nearly $50,000 in overpayments. By the time the veteran was left in financial ruin, the scammer had disappeared and could not be found. As our senior populations continue to grow, more and more aging veterans will require assistance with activities of daily living that the Veterans Aid and Attendance Benefit can provide. The application and financial eligibility requirements offer an opportunity for scam artists to take advantage of our older American veterans with empty promises and often with hidden consequences. Aging veterans and their families are forced to wade through a thicket of complicated health and financial issues under stressful circumstances. They shouldn't have to do it alone, but they certainly shouldn't be taken advantage of either by scammers who wrongly claim that they are looking out for our veterans. The daunting process of applications and appeals can make veterans, survivors, and families attractive markets to sophisticated fraud artists. Companies and individual scammers seek to build trust in a moment of need to sell them phony financial products. In the end, veterans are left with their life savings and other assets out of reach and additional benefits that are routed directly to the scammer. The Federal Trade Commission and the Florida Division of Consumer Services provide public awareness resources to assist veterans, families, and veteran service organizations to help them avoid known scams. But there are currently no criminal penalties that are imposed when scammers violate prohibitions against charging fees for benefit assistance services. This leaves law enforcement and consumer protection agencies with limited resources to combat these terrible schemes. This legislation will provide law enforcement with the tools necessary to fight back against pension poachers and other scammers. It will root out scam operations, and it will protect our veterans from falling victim to these ploys. I urge my fellow committee members to support this important legislation. I thank the many veterans groups who are supporting our efforts as well, and I thank the chairman and the ranking member again for their support, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and for purposes of the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, seek recognition.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am so incredibly proud to represent one of the districts in this country with one of the highest concentrations of veterans. I'm proud to support this bill because to defraud those who have served our country is reprehensible. Exploiting the service and sacrifice of Americans for personal gain is loathsome, and I am grateful that this legislation provides appropriate criminal penalties for those who are engaged in these acts of fraud. But there is another fraud that is harming veterans in this country, and that is the fraud that the federal government maintains by not giving veterans access to medical cannabis. Time and again, I hear in my district that veterans are placed on a combat cocktail and that they face side effects that lead to depression, suicide, and lives that are unfulfilled. I'm incredibly grateful that Chairman Goodlatte and the staff of the Judiciary Committee has worked with me on legislation that I intend to be offering in the coming weeks, which will solve this problem and advance the cause of veterans by ending the gag rule that exists at the VA, wherein there's not able to be an exchange of information regarding federally approved research and federally approved clinical trials so that veterans have more options for a healthcare solution that seems to be available in times when other circumstances and other remedies have failed. This type of common sense cannabis reform cannot come too soon because right now at the Department of Justice, we're moving in the wrong direction. We've got an Attorney General who has repealed the Cole Memo, which is one of the governing paradigms in our laws and in our practices and policies that has allowed a $20 billion legal cannabis industry to flourish. And unfortunately, the actions that the Department of Justice has recently taken put patients in jeopardy, put the very veterans that we're trying to help with this legislation in jeopardy, and risk the possibility of banks having to close within days or weeks that are taking deposits that allow these organizations and dispensaries and medical facilities to fill recommendations and prescriptions for some of our most vulnerable fellow Americans. What in the world was the Attorney General thinking to try to repeal the Cole Memo and then not allow people delivering medicine to have the capability to do that for people who are vulnerable? And so I look forward to continuing to work with members of this committee who've been so gracious to accept some of my ideas. I think it's a strong sign of bipartisanship that we're going to be able to work together, hopefully in the coming weeks, to advance legislation to end the gag rule at the VA. And more importantly, I'm hopeful that within the Trump administration, there's somebody that will be able to rescue us from the reckless acts of the Attorney General. And I believe that the Treasury Secretary has the authority to issue guidance, to issue a letter to financial institutions indicating that they could continue to take deposits, they could continue to operate while we try to bring some common sense, bipartisan solutions so that medicine can get to vulnerable people and we don't drive $20 billion into black markets, into the hands of cartels, and into the hands of money launderers. There is a better way to do this. We can be responsible adults and follow the science and end the fraud that the federal government has perpetrated on the American people regarding medical cannabis. I yield back.
For purposes of the gentleman from Rhode Island, seek recognition.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for bringing this bill for markup before our committee, and thank Mr. Rooney and Mr. Deutsch for their introduction. Rhode Island is home to tens of thousands of veterans, and the majority of the casework that comes into my office is from our veterans, who are very often the victims of some scam artist, some fraudster, someone who has tried to take advantage. As Mr. Gates said, this is conduct which is not only reprehensible, but undermines our solemn duty to do all that we can to repay our men and women in uniform who have served our country. And I really want to applaud Mr. Deutsch and Mr. Rooney for addressing this with a very sensible, common sense solution that will really go a long way to eradicating this hideous behavior. There's a special place in hell for those who would take advantage of those who have served our country and attempt to take advantage of those who have made such extraordinary sacrifices for America. So I'm proud to support this and thank the gentleman again for its introduction and yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Are there any amendments to H.R. 506? We did. A reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the bill H.R. 506 as amended favorably to the House. All those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is ordered reported favorably. Members will have 2 days to submit views, and without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. We have one other item of business before the committee, and that is the ratification of an updated subcommittee roster. Every member should have a copy on his or her desk, and I ask unanimous consent that the committee approve the appointments and assignments for our subcommittees as shown on the roster. Without objection, the updated subcommittee roster is approved. And this concludes our business for today. So thanks to all our members for attending. The markup is adjourned. Yes, sir.